Can everyone see my screen?
I see the Doug meetup. Is that the screen?
Yep, that's
okay,
what
perfect.
I'm trying to share. Perfect. All right, so thank you everyone for taking time out of your wonderful April evening to join us for a Doug meetup. So before we jump into the amazing content that AJ has for us today on BC, we're going to jump into some rules and just kind of a little bit about Doug. So if you're not familiar with Doug, I see some familiar faces, well, names on the screen. So if you're not familiar with Doug, we're 47,000 plus community members strong. We're about building community, encouraging connections, and empowering education across the entire Dynamics suite, Power Platform, everything from GP to whatever the newest is. I think the latest rename is the Copilot for finance is now finance agents. So all of the renames are included in what is made up of Dynamics user group. If you're not a member, you can join for free at dynamicsusergroup.com. There's a lot of great content and material out there, so check it out if you're not a member. All right. Did I skip? I think I skipped one. Nope. So a few rules of engagement before we get started. Be courteous, contribute to the meeting, but also let everyone participate. So feel free to ask questions in the chat during the presentation. Raise your hand and ask questions. I'll be monitoring the chat as we go through the presentation and call out any questions that might be in there if you're not comfortable speaking up. But also don't monopolize the conversations when we get to questions. Feel free to, ask a question, but then let others ask questions before you ask a follow-up. Dynamics User Group has a ton of different programs that you can check out that are all free. So there's online forums, conferences, show of hands or come off mute, throw it in the chat. Who's going to be at DynamicsCon in a little less than a month? So Gav, you're going to be there. I'm going to be there. AJ, you said you were going to be there.
I will be there. I just couldn't get to it quickly enough. Yep, I will be there.
You're good. Shirley, you going to be there?
Sad to say, I won't be there. My son's turning 18 and graduating.
Well, that's a good reason not to be there. Maybe
yeah, I'm sad about it.
I'll snag you some swag. Maybe we can meet up and go to the beach or something. I can hand you off some swag.
Threaten me with a good time.
Lee or James, either of you attending DynamicsCon?
I will have to check the dates. Was it May 13th around there?
Yes, that is coming up in a couple slides. Yeah, like the 13th to the 16th, I want to say. So, but yeah, it'll be in Chicago. So we also have, Doug YouTube. So this video will be posted up to Doug YouTube. There's other user groups that meet virtually that their content's up there as well. So there's tons of things that Doug puts out there to use for reference, to learn, and to share. So if you're looking for a specific topic, head out there. Also, throwing in a shameless plug here, if there's content you don't see out there or content that you would like for our group to have, feel free to send those suggestions to me or Gav, and we will try to find a speaker on those topics. Or if you're interested in presenting a topic, also feel free to reach out and we'll talk to you and get something set up. There's a lot of regionals coming up and going on. So in June, there will be one in Toronto, Canada. It's going to be a 2-day event. And all of these, I think, are pretty much across the board for all flavors of Dynamics. There's going to be one in August in Denver, Ohio in August as well, Texas on September 17th, and then kind of way out in the distance, but still something we're planning already, is the Southeast meetup in Tampa in January. Yes, I did say January. That is for next year, but we are already actively planning that meetup. Some international meetups. If you're in West Africa and Ghana, there's one in July. And then in East Africa and Kenya in July as well. It's going to be a 2-day event. And then if you happen to be in Denmark, there's one in September. And yep, here's the dates for DynamicsCon, which used to be DynamicsCon Live, May 13th through the 16th. If you have not already purchased a ticket, there is a user group code here called Meetup15 for 15% off. Also, if you check out LinkedIn, sometimes they post some stuff randomly throughout the week. I think there was, I don't know if it's still going on, but there were some deals that Bobby Small had been posting about. So feel free to check those out. The agenda is live. All of the presenters are actively working on their content. So if you're interested in going, I recommend checking that out. And with that, I will turn it over to you, AJ, to give us your talk on BC for manufacturers, strengths and weaknesses, no Kool-Aid.
All right. So before I get started, just a real quick, maybe show of hands, or just since we have a small enough group, how many people in the room here are manufacturing, whether you're using Business Central or another ERP system? How many folks in here are doing some level of assembly, kitting, manufacturing, something along those lines? So, Brittany, I see you've got your hand up. I see Lee's got his hand up. Did I miss anybody else? Shirley, I think your tile was covered by somebody by something else. Are you doing manufacturing?
No, we don't do manufacturing. No.
All right. So for Brittany and for Lee, just a real quick, maybe again, small audience, so we have a little more luxury of time. What do your organizations do respectively? Maybe about 30 seconds. Just give me a little bit of an idea of what you do. And then also mention what ERP system you use. Brittany, I think you said you use F&O, but yeah, tell me a little bit more.
So it's mostly customers that I support. So
Sure,
we have manufacturers in like the plastics industry. I've worked with manufacturers in like the food packaging industry, you know, apparel. So many different industries.
Gotcha. Lee, how about you?
We make about 3,500 items for the food service industry for restaurants, hotels. We have a maquiladora in Tijuana.
All right. And what system do you use, Lee?
We use Dynamics.
Sorry, go ahead.
Dynamics Business Central in the cloud.
Okay, you're in Business Central in the cloud. And do you use any add-ons, Lee?
We have eShip.
All right.
eShip, which we use up for on the shipping side.
All righty. Well, let me share my screen, and that definitely gives me a little bit of context, and we'll try to make this fun. Small enough crowd again means we have more opportunities for conversation, for interruption. If you need to, feel free to stop and ask me questions, and I'd be happy to answer them as they come. So let me know when y'all can see my screen. Oh, and I just realized I'm not sharing my camera. Let's fix that as well.
It's come through now. It's your desktop showing.
All right, wonderful. So I think you should now be seeing me as well as my screen. Let's get my presentation underway. I will. All right. I assume that's visible. Y'all can see it. And I think, Brittany, you wanted to record it. Is that right?
Yep, it's already recording, so you're good to go.
All right, lovely. Okay. So first of all, thank you for everybody who's been here. And for anybody who's going to watch this later, feel free to reach out to me after this session on LinkedIn. I'm going to have my QR code or by email if you have any questions about what I've talked about today, if you have any suggestions, if you have any additional feedback and input as well, if you're using a different system. Because one of the things that normally happens is when you present from one perspective, I may have the other perspectives a little off because of the other products that I don't keep up with as much anymore, or perhaps you have some creative way you're using manufacturing and Business Central that you want to share. My name is AJ Ansari. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and one of the ownership partners at a Business Central partner named DSWI. We're out of Houston, Texas, and we focus heavily on manufacturing. Aside from Business Central, we also do Copilot, Copilot Studio, and within the Power Platform, we do Power Automate and Power BI. Our company's domain is shown over there. I've also been a Microsoft MVP since 2018 for Business Central. And typically, a lot of the content that I prepare and I share with the community either tends to be around manufacturing or it tends to be around, first it was more Power BI, then Power Automate. And this past year, it has been so much Copilot Studio and agent building and so on. So I'm not just the person who's kind of saying you should use AI. I'm one of those people who's kind of showing you how you could potentially use AI in the things that you do. In my spare time, the little of which that I have, I'm also the founder and the editor-in-chief of Only Copilot Fans. This is usually where if this was a face-to-face session, I would have this expression on my face and I'd give it that pregnant pause so y'all could chuckle about any, similarities in name from anything else you may have heard of. But this is a news and kind of how-to website on AI, Copilot Studio. So if you're learning and you want to kind of pick up some tips and tricks along the way, great place to go. And next month, I'm also debuting Only BC Fans, which is more so going to be a show and a podcast and less written content. The LinkedIn QR code just showed up over there, and that short link bit.ly/AJ Ansari is how you can find me. Just takes you to my LinkedIn page, or just search for AJ Ansari and you'll find me there as well. So why am I talking about manufacturing, right, in Business Central? Well, at DSWI, and this is not a session about DSWI, so there will be very limited mentions, and where there are mentions, I'm going to talk specifically about relevance and not so much about our products, our services, and so on. But contextually appropriate, I thought, was the slide where 2 out of 3 of our customers are manufacturers. So that is such a heavy focus area for us. And even when they're not traditional manufacturers, like the ones we normally serve, the industrial manufacturers, the types of companies that are making compression pumps, in industrial pumps and compression devices and so on, they are in the oil and gas midstream space, and they're manufacturing something or the other, right? And so they're kind of probably maybe manufacturing pipes, or they're doing, the project-based manufacturing of all things big and small. A lot of these businesses typically fall in that job shop or engineer to order phase. They are what I would call low volume, high value manufacturers that are kind of going to market with the products that they make. Now, we do have some traditional make to stock, make to order manufacturers as well, but by and large, that seems to be when they're those types of customers, that's when we shine, because that's kind of where we've had a lot of experience. Another reason why I thought it would be appropriate for me to prepare a session like this is not only do I have experience with Business Central, working on it since 2007, over the years, I've also had varying levels of experience and intersection with some other ERP products. So NetSuite, we were a reseller for NetSuite for about 3 years before we decided to stop reselling that. I was also a co-owner of a business that sold the Acumatica product. So we founded that company in 2021. That business was called ASWI. Now it's called 3Value. And so we started that up and ran after 3 years, I exited that business. And so that business continues to thrive. But going through that original founding period, for the first 6 months to a year, I did go through some Acumatica certification, and I got to see firsthand some of the things that they were doing really well. Now, for people who know Acumatica, you probably don't need to be told, but for others, Acumatica wasn't as strong at manufacturing. They did have some capabilities, and then they went and they bought a product that was more like an add-in for the ERP system. They bought that a few years ago, around 2020 or 2021, and that significantly beefed up their capabilities. And then I was also an Intacct certified consultant for about 3 or 4 years over the years in my journey. So that was kind of my background with these products. And then I competed against some of the other ERP systems. So for many years in my career, I either did pre-sale as my kind of primary responsibility in the organization, or was also doing pre-sale alongside other work. So by experience, I used to be a practice leader and an implementer consultant, kind of progressing, I guess, said it in the wrong order. Started implementer consultant, later became a practice leader. And then after some years as a practice leader, I was a pre-sale leader. And I was competing against products like Epicor. At one time, when I used to be at Columbus, and Columbus had acquired another business that I was at called Interdyne VMI. There we sold all 4 Dynamics products. We sold NAV, which was the name of the product at the time. We sold GP, we sold FNO or AX as it was known then, as well as SL. So while I don't claim to know everything about all those products, we actually got into competitive situations where we competed against AX in-house or competed against GP in-house. And at that time, I think outside of specific industry specific solutions, the ones that had the most competition we got was from Epicor. Epicor used to be such a major competitor for us. One of the things that we used to see is that at demos especially, they were better than anybody. I like to think I did a great job, but boy, Epicor pre-sales came prepared. They were the sharpest. Unfortunately, I think as their reputation went, they didn't do such a good job after the sale. But so we did plenty of that as well. The space that we sell in today and the space that I have a lot of experience is what I would call big SMBs. So these are not like your 3-5 person companies. These are businesses that are typically at least running, $20-30 million a year, as some of these have been much larger and publicly traded businesses as well. So as big SMBs, mid-market companies. One deal that I'd done was what I would consider an enterprise, but they were very simple in their needs, and that they did actually, that opportunity was looked at, was examined by our FNO or AX team at Columbus as well as us, and we thought that, well, either product could have done well. NAV did just fine to where we didn't have to go up channel. And I over the years have either sold or evaluated pretty much most of the Business Central manufacturing ISVs in the discrete space. So I should qualify that. And I think as you've gathered from everything I've said so far, my focus has been traditionally on discrete manufacturing. Now, in my years at Columbus when I was there, we had a very large food manufacturing practice and a process manufacturing practice, which now is kind of sold under another flag called Stadion. It was called To Increase, then Stadion. They spun off of Columbus, and they now sell through the partner channel. So that's a little bit of background. I think that's where I feel like I do have some good cause and reason to be able to credibly speak to the topic I'm about to speak to today. Now, for folks who are not very familiar with manufacturing, some of this may be very educational. For everybody else, this just kind of reinforces kind of the landscape for manufacturing. When you think about manufacturing, you have the process side and you have the discrete side. And on process, you typically have your chemicals, your food and brewing and bev and biotech. And sometimes these food and bev come into one, common place, but there are some differences, right? With food and bev, both sides have your expiration dates and so on. But with bev, you also have bottling and different units of measures that you bottle in, etc. So if somebody wants 3 gallons of Coca-Cola, it's very different whether they want 3 gallons in one container or 3 gallons broken down over, small 333 ml bottles, etc. And it's not all the same when you're fulfilling. And so on. And process manufacturing is largely about your formula and batch. And even though they do have bills of materials, they're more driven by recipes than they are by routings. And on the discrete side, as we go through, you've got your, for anybody who's new to that concept, by definition, discrete is when you have discrete raw materials making, or finite amounts of raw materials making finite amounts of finished goods. So 1 of raw material A plus 2 of raw material B plus 3 of raw material C will give you 1 finished good. Typically have your bills of materials and your routings, which are instructions on how the different bill of materials are put together. And then they kind of spread out across, assembly or kitters, the real simple ones. Often time is either not a constraint with these, or even if it is a constraint, you're not generally going to cost anything by time on those. You're typically looking to capture just the cost of the materials. And then you go into the more traditional manufacturing that Business Central does really well with out of the box. And a lot of manufacturing solutions, if they do manufacturing, they probably do make to order and make to stock generally well. And so within those, you then have your some who are mixed mode manufacturers that do a little bit of both. Mixed mode can also span to some of the things you're seeing on the right. And these are typically your high volume manufacturers, lower in complexity, have higher inventory requirements. You're making consumer goods oftentimes, and when things go bad with those products, there is often a sales return mechanism for customer satisfaction. There's even if there's service, there may be send the product back to me and I'll service it and I'll send it back to you. And then in this world, you also have some contract manufacturers who are essentially paying another organization to do all the manufacturing for them, or they're doing just last mile manufacturing and somebody else is doing the bulk of the work for them. And as you move to the right, the complexity kind of, grows higher. And, oftentimes the world that I'm in, engineer to order, gets confused with CPQ or configure price quote, because you think if you're engineering to order, like you're building an elevator, for instance, and you need either 5 buttons for 5 floors or 10 buttons, and you need it to be a little bigger, a little smaller, a little taller, whatever the case may be. The people often look at that and go, "Oh, I've seen Experlogics, or I've seen this ISV or that ISV, Econ or somebody else, and they do these CPQ things. Does that work?" Well, not always, because some things some things are driven either by the consumer, and some things need to truly be engineered by the manufacturer every single time, even if you're using the same parts over and over again. So you kind of fall into that chop shop fabricator space. And as I was telling you earlier, with kind of our background, this space is a lot of low volume, high complexity, and then high value, high complexity. And these are industrial goods which you can't easily put in an envelope and mail. So installation itself is often an important step in the manufacturing process, or important step post-manufacturing. And when something breaks, you have to have a field service department. And if you're in the oil and gas world, then oftentimes to do some of the work that you're going to do, you also have equipment rental that goes with it, because you may actually not be the ones installing this finished good. You may have some other service contractor that goes out there and installs it, and you may need to rent some equipment for the purpose of installation as well. And then you go all the way to the right, which is true custom manufacturing, where just, everything, the only constant is change. And so that is also, so some customers of ours, but that is really not the space that we specialize in. And also, you're going to find few manufacturers doing that. Simply in this economy, the costs of doing that are unsustainable. So unless you're some kind of novelty, specialty type of manufacturing, then you're catering to a very specific type of crowd, you're probably not going to see a lot of manufacturers doing that. So in the Business Central world, the ones that I've checked off are the ones that happen just natively out of the box. And this one came up a little too quickly. So these are things: assembly kitting, naturally Business Central does well. Make to stock, make to order, Business Central does well. Contract manufacturing can do well. Custom manufacturing as well. And then in general, the discipline of discrete manufacturing is well handled by Business Central. Process manufacturing, on the other hand, you saw there were no check marks, because natively, Business Central lacks a lot of the capabilities like recipe tracking, recipe management, or I'm going to talk about some of the other shortcomings as we proceed. There are things that it just doesn't natively do well. I have seen people use some, beverage manufacturers, beer bottlers, and so on, use Business Central process manufacturing with some very small workarounds or small customizations. But outside of that world, you're really pushing it if you want to be doing it well and properly. And then I also wanted to add a couple of other things that you tend to see, disciplines that happen within discrete manufacturing, that I will talk about specifically as the conversation progresses. So if you are, in the wood or sheet metal space, or if you do rework or refurbished products, right? Or if you're a reverse manufacturer or recycler, recycling doesn't always get seen as manufacturing, but especially if your goal is recycle where the end product is new products, then you're basically reverse manufacturing in some ways. And so that's an important concept as well that we'll talk about in how Business Central does. And then co-products and byproducts that come oftentimes as a result of what you're manufacturing. And sometimes there's an overlap of all these sub-disciplines as well. So in a nutshell, from the first couple of slides that you saw, Business Central is ideal for make-to-order or make-to-stock or discrete manufacturers right out of the box. And now for anybody who's used a demo environment of Business Central, if you are a partner, then you'll understand why that little emoji with the little kind of innocent icon or whatever the halo icon is, because a lot of our demo items in there are bicycles. So it's like all the demos are bicycles and I think the spoke and wheel and so on and so forth. So I joke that it is great for bicycles, but actually it's not great for bicycles. And part of the reason is that unless you're making it to order or making it to stock, but the bill of material is predefined and you have these 6 pre-manufactured bicycle types, you're going to struggle. So if you just do that, great. But if you're doing custom bicycles, or if users want to be able to select this kind of pedal or this type of seat with these type of special grip handles or this many gears on the gearbox, then suddenly Business Central natively is not great. You will need some kind of an add-on. There is no out-of-box support, as I said before, on process manufacturing because it lacks the ability to understand recipes and some of the things that go with it, fills and concentrations, etc. as well. However, the thing that really makes Business Central stand out, I think, in the marketplace compared to our natural competitors, is that we have a very robust marketplace. From time immemorial, and I make it sound funny because I think earlier, Brittany, maybe you joked about pterodactyls, right? When you're talking about mosquitoes being that big. I feel like Nav and Business Central have been around for as long when pterodactyls were around, right? And so the one constant in the Nav ecosystem was that Nav customers always prefer add-ons or ISV solutions that can live inside of Business Central or are heavily designed to mimic or work with Business Central workflows. So while there are lots of add-on solutions generally for warehousing and for manufacturing, if it takes its own workflow, I'll give a great example of Vicinity Software. Really good people, they do process manufacturing. It's an agnostic add-on for process manufacturers. But in the BC world, they have not always had the greatest success. The product itself is fantastic, but they may sometimes face an uphill battle compared to somebody else like a Yavion or just trying to think of one other, Cosmo or so on. And I'm not being paid by any of these people. In fact, I have good friendly relationships with all of these ISVs, and we offer them to all of our customers. But just at first glance, between the 3 of them, Yavion and Cosmo may be better received because they're designed for Business Central. They have more Business Central screens or are natively going to work with Business Central processes. Whereas Yavion, what it does is it says, give me the raw materials, forget about everything else. I'm going to manufacture outside, and when it's done, I will send you the quantity of the finished good with anything that's needed, and I'll send you some costing information. So all the manufacturing capability then basically gets pulled out of Business Central. And we find that those add-ons struggle. But today there's such a robust marketplace for Business Central apps that you're going to find 3 to 5 options for pretty much anything you're trying to do. At last count, if I recall correctly, I think there were over 4,000 apps for Business Central and maybe more now. So as we continue the discussion, let's talk a little bit about native capabilities that Business Central Manufacturing has. Any questions right now as we're talking? Do you want me to stop, take any questions, or just continue on? I'll take that as a continue on. So native capabilities of BC manufacturing. If you are a manufacturer that needs production bill of materials, as most manufacturers do, and these production bill of materials may require multiple levels, right? Low-level codes, also the ability to have phantom bombs, so bills of materials that don't necessarily need your own routings, that are kind of a bill of material within a bill of material type of situation, and that is very native to the product. If you need routings, and routings being your instructions that need to happen, and these routings need to work in work centers or machine centers, which is a construct that is commonplace understood, but still in the Business Central world, machine centers are just specific machines within the work center. So if you have a capacity of 5 on kind of the, on painting, and so 5 work centers or 1 work center, capacity 5 for painting, but one of those is a specialty painting that can do a certain type of job, you'd probably want to define that as a machine center because you specifically want to call that. So you could do that. So your bills of materials and your routings, as they go through, they can be worked on a specific machine center. Then we have version management that is native to the system. There is some light engineer change management. So I use the word light because if you have a lot of workflows around ECM approvals, then you would probably want an add-on. But just natively, there is some capability to track some ECM right there. We also have a construct called routing link codes, and basically what that does is allows you to tie certain bills of material components to certain routing routing steps. So what that allows us to do is if you have a long tail manufacturing situation where things are going to be built over 15 days, and you have some raw material that you need for this finished good that is not in stock, you could look at the routing link codes and determine that this raw material that's missing is actually not going to be needed until the fourth routing step. And that fourth routing step is scheduled for about 3 days or 4 days down. So you could, look at when you think you're going to get that raw material and reasonably make a decision that we could start this manufacturing. We don't actually need to wait. We can start this production order, get people working on it. And by the time we get to that fifth routing step, we will have the raw material in stock. There's also native capability for tracking and handling subcontracting. And when the subcontracting invoices come in or the cost comes in, that can either be applied on a kind of time worked or units worked on. So if you're sending something out for subcontracting that is for paid by the units that they've worked on, so if they had to finish 100 pieces of something, how much have they done, and that invoice could be broken down by or tracked by those types of details. Production order types are our work orders, manufacturing orders. We have those not only for the actual work being done, but we have these planning work orders that actually allow us to kind of plan. There's a planning and a firm plan, so making some changes. And then we have this type for R&D. And the R&D production orders are great for a new product that's being built, where you want to be able to assess how much time something might take once you've kind of spread everything out, as well as the costs that might arise from doing this, the labor costs, the material costs, etc. So you can do all of that without actually consuming anything against it, without actually posting any costs. So these simulated or R&D type of production orders can be very useful. And then we have the routing, the flushing of components. This can either be done manually if you want full control, or if you have handheld devices, or if you have these computers that are, or terminals that are on your shop floor, then you may want to manually flush by scanning raw materials into what you're doing. Or you could decide if you want to forward or backwards flush things. You can tie things to be flushed at the start or an end of a routing step as well. So if you don't want to do it entirely at the beginning or entirely at the end of the production order, you can do that at the different routing level steps as well. And you can decide if you were to build 100 pieces of something, if you are building all 100 at once, as in, is each routing step completing one routing step for 100 finished pieces, then kind of moving it down that way? Or is it going to be piece by piece? So there's batches, assembly line, etc. You can control that. There's great flexibility there. And we have a pretty robust central planning engine. And so what I mean by that is it can do MRP, it can do MPS, so it can do your dependent as well as your independent demand. It can kind of trigger or give you signals to buy, to assemble, to manufacture, or to transfer. And this can be done on level-based ones, so kind of fixed reorder quantity, or it can be, like maximum inventory levels, or you can also do it demand-based. So order by order or lot by lot, you can have those types. The one thing that it does, and I talk usually about deficiencies on another slide, but it's appropriate to mention it here, is that the planning engine, it will not set its own reorder points. It does not dynamically set the reorder points. It cannot predictively analyze using AI or any algorithm when it should order more based on changing landscapes, right? So a product goes viral and can't suddenly tell you, I think we need to order more based on what's happening. However, you can, once you've instructed all the parameters or populated all the parameters for each item by each location, if you need to, it will follow those, and it will give you those buying signals and building signals or so on. And so it's a very complex and very robust planning engine that is native. Now, I do know some customers that will sometimes enhance this with an external tool, some that are built for BC and some that are external, but just by itself too, it does a pretty good job. And this entire module is fully integrated to warehousing and to costing. So all of the warehousing processes you have for picking and for putting away, and those types of things are all native to the product, and costing, including all the costing methods, whether you have FIFO, LIFO, whether you're doing kind of true average cost, whether you're doing standard cost or specific cost, all of those are done. And there's also field service capability, as I said before. So if you are an industrial manufacturer and then you need service management afterwards, so post sale service needs to happen, whether it's contract based or break fix, there is native capability built into the product, and then there are some great add-ons that enhance that ability with mobile devices and whatnot. So this is kind of the out of the box type of strengths. Oh, I forgot one more, scrap handling. So if you do have scrap material, you can do kind of scrap tracking, and there is native capability for tracking lot numbers as well as serial numbers within the system. So anything that needs to be tracked by either or, both, they can be done natively. So now let's look at the key shortcomings. So I talked about all the things it can do. Let's talk about the things it cannot do. All right. So one of the ones is finite capacity constraints. And by default, Business Central assumes infinite capacity. So when you're scheduling things out, and when you're kind of doing your central planning, it will in general assume infinite capacity. There are some flags for finite capacity constraints. I find that they're not as robust as I'd like them to be. And frankly, I find that using an add-on, and there's a few that you can choose from, for visual drag and drop scheduling will often do a much better job of giving you a visual cue to go with your finite capacity constraints. So natively, there is no visual drag and drop capability for all the recommendations from your central planning. So what you will find is that it's going to be a long list, and you can break down that list by different filters for different product types, for different warehouses, and so on. And different people can be responsible for different things, or by different signals. So all the purchases could be flushed down into one batch, and for somebody else to review. All the transfer orders could go somewhere else, and all the productions can get somewhere else, and different people can be responsible for it. But having a visual drag and drop would really allow you to see where the constraint overlays are and then decide if you want to make some changes. So natively, there isn't that capability. Now, and almost without exception, in all of the things that I identify as shortcomings, it doesn't mean that we can't sell to those types of businesses with Business Central. It means that natively there's a shortcoming, right? So this is where I was talking about the no Kool-Aid. If I'm in a pre-sale situation, I'm probably going to bat with a solution that's taking Business Central and an ISV that's going to bridge some of these gaps that are identified here. But for the purpose of this audience and anybody watching this later, I want to clearly identify what Business Central does well out of the box and what we need an add-on for. So quality management, technically you could do some very light quality management, but I wouldn't recommend it. But there are plenty of really good and robust quality management add-ons that you can look at. Engineering change management, as I highlighted a few slides ago, it is possible, but it is very, very light. And it doesn't have a lot of approval workflows. And so there isn't tracking on who approved it and when it was and so on. Compliance reporting too, there is very little in the way of that. Like if you wanted to print out, even with a QM, a certificate of kind of COA type of thing, it doesn't do that natively. So you would probably need to either build one or need an add-on. And there is no native support for Kanban. And we can have a very long conversation around that. In fact, maybe that was at a conference. Somebody had done a really good explanation as to why, most ERP systems just natively don't do so well. So in general, if you're an agile manufacturer, the agile is not just it's more of a conceptually, you have to go about it a certain way, and it's not just steps or code that you build into Business Central. But in general, Business Central is not well equipped for agile or for Kanban. So just know that. And then one of the things I mentioned on the last slide, while central planning, MRP, MPS is available and is robust in Business Central, it does not take historical demand into account. It only takes whatever you have said as the kind of demand signals. So, look at demand from sales plus, any other forecasted demand that you may have put as a number, And when the threshold is breached, then kind of reorder based on whatever mechanisms you have in place, whether it's level based or whatever quantity needs to be ordered or so on and so forth. And it does not dynamically adjust reorder points, as I talked about before as well. And there's the planning workbench. And what I mean by that is that the presentation of how central planning presents it all, it's there, but it's more function over form. And that's why I call it a weak planning workbench. So oftentimes in implementations, for those of you who use Business Central, or maybe even for F&O folks, on your role center, you have these, or used to at least maybe have these activity queues, the tiles that would kind of give you some key performance indicators or information about what's going on. We would often implement these kind of, some queues that would show us from central planning how many new orders and how many canceled orders and how many changed orders and how many POs, how many transfers, etc. There wasn't any native capability, and even what we were doing would sometimes leave a little bit to be desired. There is no native support for shop floor time collection, and it doesn't natively interface with any IoT devices as well. So if you are doing time collection, you would have to go through a kind of a screen in Business Central called the output journal or the production journal, and somebody would have to type in the things. So it's not set up to where the shop floor workers could go in and quickly log into your time. It's really more set up for time collection on a sheet of paper or somewhere else, and then the shop floor manager or supervisor is responsible for going and putting those in. Or you can also have it just kind of take based on whatever the standard assumed kind of time is for each step. So if you're activity-based costing and you do have to capture exact times, then it needs to be done by a supervisor or manager on behalf of everybody. But natively, it doesn't. And as I said just now, IoT devices, even if you have some of those or you're kind of heavily computerized or automated manufacturing floor, it cannot track what's going on. So in large terms, I can't remember if there's a title about this coming up in the next few, but I would often tell customers that once production starts in Business Central, it can be a bit of a black box, especially if you've got automated flushing enabled. So it's already taking all of your raw materials out of inventory at the beginning or at the end or at the start or the end of a step. And the most you might actually know is what routing step you are in, but you won't be able to physically tell which raw materials have been used or not. Now with add-ons, if you're using handheld scanning for consumption of materials, if you're using shop floor time collection add-ons, then you can tell exactly where it is. Or if you're a shop that's very advanced, there are some really good manufacturing execution systems as well that are designed for Business Central that can give you down to the second idea of what's going on your shop floor. And then so that was the next style. And then weak project to manufacturing and integration. So what I mean by that is if you are a project accounting firm, then you're using the projects or the jobs module in your ERP system or in Business Central. And the projects module is not so much designed to manufacture as it is to finish a project by consumption of material and consumption of labor. So if I'm setting up a conference room, that's one of the demonstration projects that we have in Business Central. I may need some tables and some chairs, so I'll consume those. I may need some labor time for the people that are going to do the work. There may be some project management time, and I could have all kinds of other things like, how does a cost get recorded? Do we have WIP, et cetera, et cetera? But if by virtue of what I'm doing on the project side, if some manufacturing has to happen, sure, it'll do it. If I needed this table or a table, I just realized I have a virtual background, so you don't see my desk or table. But if I needed a desk, and I'm also a manufacturer of that desk, what the project will do is it will trigger that desk to be manufactured. However, when we talk projects-based manufacturing in the ETO world, oftentimes that desk itself may have some changes on it. The desk, kind of surface may have to be a little bit wider. Maybe the legs have to support more weight, so they need to be sturdier. We may need to have 2 doors versus 3. So those types of things that come up in an engineering to manufacture, engineer to order type of scenario, project-based manufacturing scenarios, those are not well handled. That is where oftentimes we need an add-on. And it is poor, Business Central is poor for wood and sheet metal based manufacturers. And I have a slide for each of those, and I'll explain specifically why it doesn't do so well, even though those are discrete scenarios, and how some of these can have workarounds, or will need some customization, or in some cases, there's actually add-ons. For sheet metal, I think more than one partner has some little things they have done, but there is one partner that has their own go-to-market solution called Real Steel. So they've invested and they just focus on sheet metal situations. So they've just built an add-on for that, right? So they're kind of the king of sheet metal manufacturing. And while we have some stuff that we do, and some other partners might too, if it's just that, maybe I imagine that they're probably better than all of us in that space. And then there is no native co-product or byproduct support. And again, I talk about that as well. I think there is a specific slide, but I will talk about co-product, byproduct right now a little bit. I can't remember if I'd added or removed that slide in this presentation. So what happens in BC is if I do have a co-product, I can tell it to also build one extra product as a outcome of this manufacturing or production order. However, the cost tracking associated for that co-product, the cost of that, how much cost of the raw material should be allocated towards this co-product or byproduct, those are the things that are just not natively part of Business Central. Similarly, with reverse manufacturing, while it can take one good and break it down into a lot of other goods, Business Central's costing is set up so that you have a lot of costs coming from a lot of materials and labor kind of combining into this one bucket, which is then going to be applied to your finished good. So you're accumulating those costs, and that cost then gets put in. With reverse manufacturing, you're starting off with one finished good, which has some cost. And these costs need to be broken down if you're reverse manufacturing across a lot of finished goods that are being created. And how do you take that? And we have some specialty in that area with what we have done. And I know a couple of the partners have done that as well. That is one place where I don't know that there's an add-on in AppSource. But each of us are doing one of the things that we all cringe about doing a little bit to some extent, which is overriding Business Central's costing, costing code. And that costing code, costing logic is such a complex beast. And you're such a responsibility. So if you are a partner or an aspiring developer and you're thinking, hey, I could do that, I think it's the costing part of it where you're going to realize very quickly what a huge risk that poses. And overcoming that can be a very costly endeavor. Also, Business Central is great at assembling and kitting. So anything that doesn't require a routing or where time or cost from time is not a constraint or important, it does it great. But at disassembly, so let's say you assemble something to stock and you put it on a shelf. If you've never sold that product, it will let you disassemble it. But if that product's been sold to a customer, even if they've never opened it, they ship it back in original packaging. If you want to disassemble that, Business Central will not let you do it because it kind of assumes that's walked out of the door, and then it loses track of how to break down the cost associated with that assembled product. That is the reason it has a problem. But if it's only sitting to stock, it kind of knows exactly what was used to build it, and it can disassemble that looking at its original ledger entries. Also, if you have anything that's been assembled to order, so on the fly, you're assembling it on a sales order and shipping it, it will not let you disassemble that as well. I may be going a little bit over time. Is that okay? I know we started a little late. Is that fine if I go for another about 15, 20 minutes? I think I have about 10 minutes anyways, but.
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Perfect. All right. Now, domain by domain, I wanted to touch on some of these exceptional areas. Process manufacturing, I've said it a couple of times already. Business Central's core shortcoming is the lack of a recipe construct. It has no way to track continuous fill or batch. Batch in some ways it does, but in the process world, when we say batch, we're talking a little bit different. It doesn't do those well. Concentrations levels, mixes, it doesn't understand that well. Also, I think I talked about this when I was mentioning BEV, that rudimentary unit of measure conversions, filling something, a gallon in 1 gallon bottle or canister versus 4 0.25 gallon bottles or a lot of small bottles individually that collectively add up to a gallon can all be very different things, and can even have different pricing. So, Business Central natively does not do a good job of it. Each of those would have to be stored as different products. So that is what you would essentially have to do if you're a beverages manufacturer and you're using Business Central natively. So you couldn't just say, I have 5 gallons of Coca-Cola or whatever industrial liquid you have. When you manufacture, you could have some things that are stored in 5 gallons. And you could then have, a 1 gallon packing size. You could have, and that is a different product. And it's just not a unit of measure of that original product. It is a separate product unto itself. And you can have a separate product unto itself for the individual bottles, etc. And you could even use a manufacturing process or an assembly process to get from larger sizes to smaller sizes, etc., based on what you need to do. Also, natively, there is no, not to be confused with FIFO, which is first in, first out, but there is no FIFO support, which is first expiry, first out, which is really important for food and products that have an expiration date. So that is not native. Perishables are not going to do well with Business Central natively. So most process manufacturing, solutions that are based around food, that is going to be an important construct that they deal with. Also with growers, that's the other part where you grow, lettuce, for instance, you're going to have one lettuce could have different weight. So you have these things like your catch weight. You also have to look at, are you selling by the lettuce head or are you selling by the weight? Are there processes to take it to market that are like chopping it, cleaning it, so on and so forth? So those are things it doesn't do well. And because there's not good native quality control support, you're probably going to struggle there. Food products need different type of quality management. Even if you're doing with chemicals, you're doing differently. So chemical manufacturers would often look at quality control that could have, concentration levels and so on as an important, measurement. And you might have thresholds with food. There could be visual quality constraints. So, potato chips makers will often have these things machines that will, visually look at and inspect the color of the chip. If it's not the right color, those chips are picked off the line, etc. And so for somebody else, it could be, something else that deems something good or bad. So quality control, getting the right QC support solution for food manufacturing would be very important. Medical manufacturing. So in the United States, if you're a Class 2 medical devices manufacturer, the core processes that are needed for Class 2 medical devices manufacturing, that's all good and included with Business Central. But where it falls short is reporting requirements. So compliance requirements for CFR Part 22. Those types of things are not native. And some of these are just quality control reports, and they're just the, what's been built, or it's tracking of the finished good all the way back to the source materials and the lot numbers and the serial numbers. Those things we can easily track in BC, but who worked on it? That may not be tracked, especially if your work centers are not made up of machine centers that are people. Some organizations will often have to put people as machine centers so they can track John or Tina or Bob or Susan, whoever worked on that. And further, sometimes with these reporting requirements, you also have to track what they've been certified on and when they last took their certification updates or whatever else they have. You need to track those types of things as well, and Business Central doesn't do a good job of that. I think I did mention full item tracking capability from raw material to finished good. We have that. It is actually available, but it's not available as a ready-to-use report for compliance. It is more of a lookup, and it will show you everything. So you would have to build specific reports if that is something that is needed. Also, the Business Central service, online service itself, is HIPAA compliant. But what it is not is it doesn't give you, if you needed like a checklist for everything to show that you're HIPAA compliant, that you can have privacy tags on customer information and so on and so forth. There is no ready-to-print checklist that Business Central generates. So we used to, at my last organization at Columbus and Interdyne BMI, we had a health vertical called ERP for Health. And in that, we had created some of those things, the checklists and things that were required to be able to sell in that space. But natively, Business Central doesn't do that. We do have some privacy tags in Business Central that were primarily designed for GDPR. HIPAA compliance is different from GDPR. It's more of the same concept of privacy. But with HIPAA, the underlying concern is that the database itself should be encrypted to a specific level. So not just standard encryption. For a longest time, actually, Business Central, the first few years of its existence, the on-premises offering could be HIPAA compliant because you could put that in SQL and Enterprise, which had the requisite level of encryption. But SQL Server Professional, I believe, did not, or Essentials, whatever the lower levels were called, they did not. And Business Central Online was not running or could not guarantee that it was running on SQL Enterprise, so they did not have that listed. And it was only, I think, back around 21 or 2022 that they officially announced HIPAA BAA compliance. So moving on from medical manufacturing to wood, stone, and sheet metal, I promised some details there. The biggest shortcoming is what happens with remaining raw material. So oftentimes, if you're manufacturing and something's left behind, you scrap it. But if you're starting off with, let's say the wood example, you have a kind of a 2x4 or kind of a wood plank, and it's a 6-foot long wood plank, and your requirements needed you to use 4 feet of those, right? You have 2 feet of that. So you cannot put that back into raw material as 0.33, you each or piece of a 6-foot wood plank. You would need to then put that into a different item. And so natively, it doesn't have that ability to do that. If you did make that a co-product or a byproduct, it wouldn't know how much cost to assign to that 2-foot plank, and that would be the other shortcoming. So you do oftentimes need to kind of figure those types of things out. So it doesn't do a good job. And also, if you did have a need for 6 feet, you couldn't get 3 pieces of 2 feet wood plank, especially if you needed one contiguous 6-foot plank, because otherwise you would need joints and it would probably be not that stable for the job that you're trying to do. So that is an area where it doesn't do well. With sheet metal, especially if you're cutting your sheet into circles and so on, there could be some really good scrap metal left that may not cut into circles, but you could use that for something else. So again, you cannot scrap all of it, but you can't also say you have, just by area of what you've cut out, what you've got left is this much square meters or square feet of sheet metal. So unfortunately, that is the other part that's an issue. So a lot of times, as I said earlier with the wood situation, it's either the unit of measure issue or the cost of the remaining parts. That is, or even if you were to make a byproduct, the cost of that byproduct, co-product. I think that is going to be an issue that Business Central natively cannot overcome. So oftentimes that is a place where you need to kind of see how you're going to change your processes or what you're going to customize about the product. Reverse manufacturing, recycling, I talked about it already, but to revisit a core concept and kind of solution that we'd built to us in that world is a separation order, where you separate a finished good. And so you do have a big costing issue there again. And I think from here, industrial manufacturers, our world, build low volume, high value, high cost products. A lot of times these are custom builds where the finished goods are engineered based on pre-selected library of raw materials. When businesses first start, a lot of times when they call themselves job shops, and you go to a tour of their facility, there is often a kind of a graveyard of things that they've bought that they have never used in years. Why? Because every time they're building something new, they decided to use one more new shiny raw material, and that raw material could not just be sourced in 1 or 2 pieces, so they had to buy whatever minimum unit they had to buy or minimum quantity, and they thought they were going to use it again. But because they weren't using proper engineering processes or kind of engineer to order principles, they would not reuse those same things. And once again, more shiny parts would be bought. So as these businesses graduate to either, better processes internally or a new system, that's where, they start doing those better. And they work with pre-selected library of raw materials. And Business Central, does have that ability to kind of build and keep different versions of raw bills and materials, etc. And where Business Central falls short, though, is saying, I build an elevator, and this elevator bill of materials is going to be different from this production order to this production order. It will let me change once the manufacturing starts or once I create a production order, but a lot of times we need a lot of that stuff to happen with engineering before the production order even gets created. Because when the production order is created, it's already sent out signals to MRP, NPS to buy, build, transfer, etc. We don't want those things to go out there and then for those to be recalled because engineering made changes. That is too late. So with proper engineer to order situations, you often need to have that happen before production orders that you ever get created. And that is what Business Central doesn't do well, because we don't want to just, how would I say, make a final and lasting change to the bill of materials. It is a change for that specific request. So we start off in a job or a project, change it there, and then release the production orders. So from there, as I wrap up, I've got, I think, just one or two more things to talk about, which is our competitors. So I will talk about a few. There are so many. It can be exhaustive. So I'll only talk about the few that I know. Acumatica is one of those. With Acumatica, as I was saying at the beginning, 3-4 years ago, they were not a robust competitor. But right now, if I'm looking at competitors that are cloud-based ERP systems, that are very much designed for the same target audience, size, scale, revenue band, type of business as Business Central customers are, with a very robust and continuously improving discrete manufacturing, kind of capabilities. I think Acumatica really does compete with Business Central pound for pound. They continue to add more functions and features to manufacturing. There's things that BC does better. There's things that Acumatica does better, but Acumatica is truly a good and strong competitor. If I were to look at Epicor has such robust manufacturing capability. As I said before, demos super well. Very, very good manufacturing workbench. Just the way they present things in the product to the user, our users, even the ones who end up getting Nav before Business Central. Business Central's interface is certainly much better, but with Nav, they would often kind of tell us, that they really liked what they saw with Epicor and kind of how those screens were better designed to highlight and to manifest things with manufacturing. However, I think with Epicor, one of the shortcomings was their implementation services that Epicor offered. Oftentimes we had customers that had lost, or we had lost the deal to Epicor, and they would have them for a year or 2 years, and eventually after a failed implementation, they would come and get Nav, despite the fact that they liked manufacturing. I think in other aspects of it, it wasn't as good. One other shortcoming that they have now is that they do not have a true cloud solution. So unlike Business Central, unlike Acumatica, and like some other competitors I'll offer here, they have a what would I say, a hybrid cloud offering that they have. So that is definitely one of those things that sometimes businesses looking for true SaaS solutions will kind of move away from. With Sage, I wanted to highlight two offerings that they have. ERP X3 is more up-channel. It kind of plays typically in that F&O space. It has robust manufacturing capability. Sometimes we do compete against them, but the natural competitor in this space that BC has is more Intacct. Intacct is really good at accounting. It is the AI CPA endorsed accounting solution, and so they're good. I still think Business Central does accounting better, has better capabilities, but Intacct is really good. But Intacct never had good native inventory management or manufacturing capabilities. But Sage has done a really good job of enhancing those. So inventory capabilities got added natively, and Sage has been building this one solution that is primarily designed for Intacct, but sits outside of Intacct for manufacturing, and they are hoping they can use that for other solutions or offer that standalone in the marketplace as well. And so I understand that solution is kind of in preview builds, and a lot of partners that sell Sage are looking at them. And the feedback I've got, a couple of my business partners are heavily involved in the Sage side. And so the feedback I get from them is that Intacct could be a real serious competitor to Business Central going forward. And it is a true native cloud solution. But Intacct is not easy to customize as Business Central, and your library of add-ons, so where Intacct will fall short, your library of add-ons with Business Central with AppSource are significantly larger than the library of apps you'll see with Intacct. And lastly, or actually last but one, NetSuite. And NetSuite is, outside of manufacturing, such a major competitor for Business Central. They are the first true cloud ERP system, and they definitely tout that. Today, Business Central now has more customers than NetSuite. Business Central is 45,000. I think NetSuite claims about around 40 or 41. And NetSuite does really well in a lot of places. But where NetSuite does not do so well and is a little clumsy on is manufacturing. They have native manufacturing capability, but they just do not do so well. The pricing model and that, the licensing model and that is also very complex. The other aspect is that they have a very small library of add-ons. So engineer to order, for instance, a space that we specialize in, they don't do so well. CPQ, because of the existence of some add-ons, they do okay. But overall, NetSuite, when we see them in the room, we often know in a manufacturing situation, we know we're probably going to have a really good opportunity here. However, if it's project accounting in general, as a good example, project accounting, they really shine on the PSA side. And there's some other sides like that that they do really well. The one I did not put in as a tile because I did not think I would be having an F&O person in the room, and F&O usually sits at a different level, but I will make one comment about it. I think in my experience around AX and F&O, in most cases, Business Central and F&O could do some of the same, could go for some of the same customers, but with F&O, we would often need fewer add-ons. And so what you would find is F&O out of the box did better with mixed mode manufacturing. And, you know, Brittany, you can correct me, but I recall even a while back, they had some light CPQ configure price quote capability that was native to the system. There is some native process capability that Business Central lacks. So out of the box, it would do some things well. There would be times where there would be some add-ons that we use for either or both. But if you do already have, if you've already looked at and checked a lot of boxes that would lean towards F&O, you might as well go with F&O all the way for manufacturing as well. But BC beefed up with the right add-ons. And in our types of deployment partners that deal complex manufacturers like we do, we'll often have 5 to 6 add-ons in our deals. An add-on for shop floor time collection, an add-on for warehouse scanning for picking, put away and stuff. Maybe an add-on for project-based manufacturing like we're doing. Maybe an add-on for mobile field service, etc. So you were talking a few of these types of things. A couple other might come for AP automation and so on. F&O, you may need fewer of some of those add-ons, and that's a big thing. The other part is implementation, and I think that has changed from what I hear from F&O partners. Back in the day when it was AX, it was less the software licensing that would drive people one way or another. It would be implementation with BC would be significantly cheaper. F&O would be bigger and more complex. But we would find that if it was a large multinational business, even though BC does a good job with multinational consolidation, F&O just made it more effortless. So it was a large multinational manufacturer, and there was more complexity. We would push the deal, and the deal would be won by F&O or AX. And if even the revenue band was higher on a business, but the complexity was more streamlined, then it would kind of come down channel to NAB. So I think I did manage to stay within that extra 10-minute window. If you have questions, I'm happy to take those. Once again, my QR code, my email address, find me on LinkedIn or email, but I prefer LinkedIn for, non-business conversations like these. And if you have interest in AI, please visit Only Copilot Fans for help. Questions and answers, feedback, any thoughts? Who's awake still?
Nice overview on strengths and shortcomings.
Thank you, Lee.
Yeah, lots of good information. I'm not in manufacturing, but it's nice to know all the options that there are out there.
Yep. Thank you.
Yes, it was really interesting to see the viewpoint from outside of Microsoft, because it's good. So I do recruitment, and my team, a lot of us are in Texas, so energy manufacturing is a big part of what they do day to day. So it was nice to get that perspective as well, because you do it, you see the value it brings, but knowing it in that detail, where it's actually better or where maybe slightly behind, it's really interesting.
When we were NetSuite partners, and before I exited the Acumatica venture that we'd founded, both of those vendors do a really good job of creating battle cards against Business Central internally, and then also on public resources, you see these other folks have come up with comparisons, and especially against Business Central, I find that so many of the comparisons are very unfairly weighted. They make false claims about Business Central, things that it can do that they claim that it can't do, and so on. And so we decided, what better way, instead of making battle cards against other products, what better way than to just create our own library of things that it does or does not do. Now, we're not presenting this to every prospect that we go to because this can cause more confusion. But I think when it's called for, and they want to know what's good and what's not, I think it does us well as well, because we've now done the homework on and we're able to speak to it. And so we thought this would be a great resource to share with the community. And so
Nice.
thank you very much for the opportunity. I know this is going to go up on YouTube. Doug usually puts them up there. If you could share the link with me, Brittany, I would be very grateful, because then I can kind of put that up on LinkedIn as well, and I can kind of share that out there.
Yep. Yeah, I'll make sure you get the link. And thanks for sharing. It's funny. Until I think about a year and a half ago, I was under the impression that BC could not actually do manufacturing. And somebody told me that, and I was like, wait, I thought it didn't. And so, it's interesting to see the similarities between BC and F&O, coming from, I previously thought that it could not do that. So, it's always helpful to learn the new things, but, it was definitely a fantastic presentation. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, Brittany, I've got one comment. So hearing somebody from F&O say that doesn't hurt my itty bitty heart. But when I first became part of Interdyne BMI, which later became acquired by Columbus, and we had a GP practice, and the first time we went to a kind of a manufacturing deal, it was GP versus BC versus AX. And first they sent our GP versus NAV at the point folks in there, and Great Plains, they went in the room thinking NAV didn't do manufacturing and they were so much better. And by the time it was done, they turn around, they go like, wait, you guys have more capabilities than we do. And I think Great Plains did well if you added like this product called Wensoft, I believe, and a couple other add-ons. You did that, then they were really strong. But just out of the box, I think NAV did more than Great Plains did. And for them to think that we were so poor at it, really, that had hurt my heart. I mean, I was not very impressed by that. But when AX says it, I get it. I mean, you're at an enterprise product space, and you're really looking at us as your little brother, right, or sister. And so to think that the lower grade product, or the lower market space, I think is a better way to say it, product doesn't do it. It's it can happen. I can see where you get that impression from.
Yeah, you guys have some much cooler tools in BC than we have in F&O, just because it's based on Power Platforms. You can do some of the cooler stuff, whereas I'm like, I saw a button and I was like, oh, that's really cool. I've never seen that button before. And then I realized I was reading BC documentation and not F&O documentation. So, yeah, those headers on like Microsoft Learn, they matter a lot. Read those before you read the whole article. And then you're like, oh man, they get it, but we don't. So
yeah. Fantastic. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining late on an evening. And I hope this was valuable use of your time. Reach out to me if anything you want to follow up about comes to mind. And I am ready to sign off if you are.
Perfect. No, thanks for speaking again. We really appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your evening, everyone else.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.